Boker Tov and welcome back to our series on Sefer Bereishit. This week is Parashat Toldot, and before we talk about the big topic, which everyone talks about, the blessings that Yitzchak wants to give Esav, which are stolen by Yaakov, and try to understand what's going on in that story, just a quick note about the life of Yitzchak, which is very short, very little detail in Chumash about what happens in his life, but the main story is his attempt to get along with his neighbors, with the Plishtim. Unfortunately, he gets into fights with the Plishtim. Remember, digging wells, the first one's called Esek and Sitna, the first two, they get into fights. Finally gets to Rechovot, and they have peace with the local population. I want to focus on what happens after Yitzchak gets along with his neighbors, and he digs a well and they don't fight over it. That's going to be in verse 22. Again, chapter 26, verse 22, Chavav Chabet. They move another place, they dig another well. There they don't fight about it. Vayikra Shma Rechovot, the name of Rechovot in Israel today is based on this story. V'yomer ki ata hirchiv Hashem lanu ufreinu ba'aretz. Now it's a sign that we're going to prosper in this land and grow. And after reaching peace, he goes from there to Beersheba, where Abram was. And interesting, Vayera elev Hashem b'laylahu. God tells Yitzchak that night when he goes to Beersheba, remember that's where Abram built his Eshel, Mizbeach, and called out in God's name. God tells Yitzchak, Anochi Eloi Avram Avicha, Al Tira, don't worry, I'll be with you, Kitcha Anochi, and I'll bless you, and I'll make your seed great, just like, and for the sake of Avram, my servant. Then, what does Yitzchak do? Vayiven sham mizbeach, vayikra b'shem Hashem, vayit sham oholo. What happened? For the first time, we see Yitzchak doing what Avram Avinu did. What did Avram Avinu do? Avram, whenever he pretty much had time, built the mizbech and called out in God's name, especially when people looked up to him. And the highlight of that was not only when he first made Aliyah from Mesopotamia, his first arrival in Beitel, he built the mizbech and called out in God's name. His return from Egypt after the famine with his wealth, returning to Beitel and calling out in God's name in Beitel. And finally, after his treaty with Abimelech, and Abimelech looking up to him and wanting to make a treaty with him, the Eshel he built in Beersheba, and calling out in God's name in Beersheba, Vayikra Sham b'shem Hashem kelolam, and the fact that after the Akedah, it's emphasized he returns to Beersheba and continues that goal in his mission of making a name for God, which is going to be the ultimate purpose of God's nation, to make a name for God through how we behave and how we act and how we talk. Interesting, Yitzchak is going to do the same thing finally. What was he waiting for? He couldn't call out in God's name and make a name for God until he reached peace with his neighbors. If he's arguing with the Plishtim, if there's Esek and Sitna, if they hate him, they don't get along with him, even though Yitzchak might be right. But when your neighbors don't look up to you, don't appreciate you, and they're fighting with you, again, you might be on the right and they might be wrong, but the fact they don't look up to you, you're not able yet to make a name for God. Yitzchak's ability to make the name for God is only going to be once he achieves peace and quiet with his neighbors and they respect him and he's getting along with them. We're going to find a very similar pattern later in Jewish history where when do we build the house for God? When can we build a temple to make a name for God? Only when we reach a time period of peace. And therefore, even though David wants to build a house for God, God tells David, you're living in a time of war, you're a man of war, your time period is one of war. Not yet, but your son, Shlomo, can build a temple on what condition? That he'll be a man of peace. Remember, that's what God tells him. That's why he's named Shlomo, because in order to build the house of God, he has to be a man of peace, and therefore name your son Shlomo to remind him to build a temple for God, you have to be living in peace with your enemies. Now, there are times of war and time of peace, as we say in Kohelet, et melchama veit shalom. But in order to build a house for God, you have to have peace with your enemies. And one of the steps in doing that is acting in a way that other nations will respect you, and also working in a way that hopefully they'll not only respect you, live with you in peace. And those things we pray for, and hopefully our prayer also to inspire us to behave properly so people will look up to us and respect us, to enable us to be that nation that makes a name for God through our behavior, again, through our action, and hopefully with a temple representing those ideas. Now, in light of that, let's take a look at the big story where Yitzchak is assuming it's time to die. Remember, Yitzchak, chapter 27. and again, assuming he's going to die soon, he's not able to see. He wants to give a blessing to Esav. Now, the big question everyone always asks is, why is he blessing Esav and not Yaakov? That's a big question. And the assumption everyone has is that there's only one child you can bless, because what do we know? We know that there's 3 forefathers. Remember, who knows 3? 3 are the Avot, the patriarchs. Assuming there's only room for 3 patriarchs, and Yitzchak therefore can only pick one son, therefore it's got to be Esav or Yaakov, and Esav is preferred by Yitzchak. Yitzchak wants Esav, and Rivka wants Yaakov, and the story we all know. I'd like to suggest a very different understanding, and there's something to explain this. We'll follow this throughout Sefer Bereishit. For some reason, God does not tell our ancestors how many generations there'll be in this choosing process. There's a process called Bechira. We know there's 3 generations of Bechira, meaning God will pick Avram Avinu, generation 1. From all of Avram's children, only one is chosen, Yitzchak, generation 2. From all of Yitzchak's children, only one is chosen, Yaakov. We hit Yaakov, all of his children are chosen from all of his wives, and we get our 12 tribes, and no more filtering after that. Okay, we're going to talk about that a lot in our series on Sefer Bereishit. That's going to be one of the themes that tie the whole book together. We're going to start that theme this week in Parashat Toldot. We'll develop it over the next several weeks. But it seems to be that God is leaving our ancestors, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, unclear in regard to how many generations there will be in the filtering process. Now, what I want to suggest is our ancestors, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, are all assuming there's only one generation, or that they're the last one, meaning God told Avraham Avinu, you're chosen, you're chosen, you and your offspring. And Avraham has every reason to think that all of his offspring are going to be chosen. Only before Brit Milah, God tells Avraham Avinu, only a child from Sarah will be chosen, and his name will be Yitzchak, ki b'Yitzchak yikrei Chazara. It's God's decision that even though he promised Avraham that his offspring will be blessed, God decides only Yitzchak from all of his children. Now, what would have happened if Sarah had more children? We don't know. Because she only had Yitzchak, that was it. And therefore Yitzchak is chosen. But it could be that Yitzchak thinks he's chosen, and had he had a brother, maybe that brother would have been chosen, but he never had a brother. And therefore, God chose Avram, basically one matriarch, one patriarch, Avram and Sarah, one child, Yitzchak. Yitzchak is chosen. But Yitzchak has no reason to think that both his children wouldn't be chosen. Why not? In fact, what did God tell Yitzchak before the famine? Don't go down to Egypt. Remember the beginning of the beginning of Parashat Chavav, when there's a famine in the land, what does God tell Yitzchak? Don't go down, Al Tared Mitzrayma, stay in the land. And the famous line, Pasuk Gimel, in chapter 26, Gor ba'aretz hazot v'yem chava v'racheka, stay in this land and I'll bless you. Ki lacha ulezaracha atenet kol etzot ha'el, v'kimoti atashvua asher nishbati l'Avram avicha. You and your offspring are going to get this land. If you were Yitzchak and God told you that, you would think that all your children are chosen. Ki lacha ulezaracha. And therefore Yitzchak has no reason to think that both his children wouldn't be chosen. Assuming that both children are chosen, both Yaakov and Esav, when Yitzchak is about to die, he doesn't have to decide who's chosen, because he's assuming that both are chosen. Rather, assuming that they're both chosen, who's going to lead the family? Notice, I'm not choosing the Bechir, the only one. Yitzchak has to choose the Bechor, who's going to lead the family. Now, if you have 2 sons, one is what we call nowadays a macher, a doer. He's a hunter, he's married, he has children, he makes a living, he gets things done. He might not be the best behaved, but I'll call it for a very outgoing son, just for the sake of a comparison. One son Chiloni and one son Dati. One son religious, one son not so religious, more secular. But maybe not secular in the sense involved in the outside world. One Ishtam sitting and learning. He has 2 children. Who should run the country? The secular child, who's involved in business and hunting, and he can be a warrior and he can run things and run a business and run the country. And what would Yaakov's job be to do? He can sit and learn, he can be a teacher, maybe a judge. Basically, what later becomes the difference between the job of Yehuda, or maybe the job of Yosef, running the country, as opposed to Levi, who's going to be the teacher, Yoru Mishpatech Yaakov, later when we divide up the tribes in similar division. Meaning, assuming both children are chosen, Yitzchak wants Esav to be the family leader, what we like to call the Bechor, and Yaakov will be the family teacher. Now, in light of that, let's look at the blessing that Yitzchak planned to give Esav, which later was stolen by Yaakov. What was that blessing? We know it by heart. We say this on Mosai Shabbat. Some people have this minhag. What did Yitzchak bless Yaakov, but intended to bless Esav? It wasn't a blessing that you're the only one, you're the chosen one, but rather, what did he tell him? Again, in chapter 27, I'm pretty sure it's verse 27, or verse 28. Basically, you should be a rich man. God should bless you with prosperity, with wealth, etc. Your crops should grow well. That's not you're the only one, but rather you should be wealthy and prosperous. Other nations should serve you. It means other nations should respect you and work for you. Other nations and people. Basically, this is the goal of the Jewish people. Ibn Ezra explains in this manner that this is a blessing for the Jewish nation in general, that we should be a people that other nations look up to. Meaning what? Within the family, you're the senior partner. You're the gvir. You're the strong one among your brothers. Assuming that they're both chosen, Yitzchak was intending that Esav should be the family leader. And he would basically be the prosperous one, run the country, run the economy, maybe do the army, run the government. And ultimately, Yaakov would also receive a blessing from his father, basically to be the teacher, the learner, maybe your spiritual guidance. And we have a nice division of the Jewish people between Yaakov's and Esav's. That seems to be what Yitzchak was thinking. Now, which makes a lot of sense. And Yitzchak had no reason to think otherwise, that they wouldn't both be chosen. God didn't tell him anything otherwise. Who knows differently? That's the drama that God sets up in the Parsha. For some reason, and we're told that in the beginning of the Parsha, that God told Rivka when she was expecting that in your pregnancy, those twins that you have aren't two brothers, those are two nations. Remember? God tells Vayomer Hashem La, God tells her to Rivka, Shnei goim bevitnech. That's not two brothers, that's two nations. And one will serve the other. But the main message God is telling Rivka is that the Bechira process is going to continue another generation. Everyone was assuming that both Yaakov and Esav would be chosen. For some reason, God wants Rivka to know, and not Yitzchak, that only one's going to be chosen, and it'll be the younger one. And therefore, Rivka knows from the time of birth that Yaakov will be the chosen one. Now, why Yaakov was preferred over Esav from birth? Read the first line of Malachi. It seems like a decision from birth that God decided I like this one and not that one. Or was it because of their behavior later on? Not in the scope of our shir today. But what it does explain, it explains why Rivka is sure that she's doing the right thing by having Yaakov, so-called steal the brachot. What Rivka thinks Yitzchak knows, again, that's part of the drama, unclear. Why Rivka doesn't tell Yitzchak. There's a beautiful Ramban where he explains that Rivka was afraid that Yitzchak wouldn't believe her, and therefore she doesn't tell him. Again, a lot of psychology behind it. Or it could be, the way I understand it, is that Rivka knows it's her secret. She can't tell anybody, and that is the reason why she has her son lie, because she's sure she's doing the right thing, which again sets up a drama which is classic through Jewish history. Sometimes people do things which are wrong, but they're sure that it's the right thing to do because of some prophecy or some understanding they have of the ways of God. Again, I'm not judging who's did the right thing or wrong thing, but there's no doubt there's tremendous drama in this story. Ultimately, what's going to happen? Yaakov will be the only one chosen, but it seems like God wanted Yaakov to receive the bracha of Esav. I'll share with you, and to share with this, understanding I learned from my Rebbe, Rabbi Yoel Ben Nun, who said beautifully that what the story might be teaching us, which is sort of the message of Hesed Yeshivot, is that to be the Jewish people, the blessing can't go to Yaakov because he's too simple. He's an Ishtam. The blessing can't go to Esav because he's not an Ishtam. He's a man of war. To be the Jewish people, you need the hands of Esav and the voice of Yaakov. Remember, Kol Kol Yaakov Yadam Yedei Esav? To receive the blessing of the Jewish people, you need someone who, on the one hand, knows how to go to war, knows how to hunt, how to be a leader, how to be a hunter, how to be involved, how to live in a secular world, but at the same time, be immersed in Torah, to be an Ishtam Yoshev Halim. To be the blessing of the Jewish people is such that to be that model nation for other people to learn from, I can't separate my spiritual life from my secular life. Meaning, I have to be involved in this world, I have to be involved in Olam Hazeh, at the same time, be involved in spirituality and learning, in Torah study. And therefore, to receive the blessing of the Jewish people, it has to be the voice of Yaakov together with the hands of Esav. And therefore, Yaakov has to dress up. Yaakov, as Yaakov, isn't ready yet to receive the blessing. He has to dress up like Esav. The blessing only becomes official when Yaakov learns how to fight. And therefore, Yaakov has to go through, I like to call Lavan University. We'll talk about that next week. With Yaakov and Lavan, he has to learn how to survive. And ultimately, his final test will be his fight with the angel, which Chazal identify as the Malach of Esav. Only after having that struggle and fighting and surviving that fight, becoming victorious, now he has a name change from Yaakov to Israel, and that will be the Jewish people with the voice of Yaakov and the hands of Esav, and that will be the motto that we learn from. It could be, that's a possible explanation for the drama. I'm trying to show you objectively, Chumash is setting up a very deep drama between Yaakov and Rivka, between Yitzchak and Rivka, regarding their children. For some reason, God wants Yitzchak to think they're both chosen, and Rivka is only once chosen. But through that drama, it could be we learn a very important lesson. We have a Havamina. Someone might think the Jewish people should divide between let those sit and learn, and those who be secular run the country. And that would be the Jewish people. And God, through the story, is telling us to be the Jewish people, to be that model nation for people to learn from. You have to be both Esav and Yaakov in the same person. You have the ability of Esav to be involved in working in day-to-day life, at the same time being Yaakov, sitting and learning, and having that personality, having them together, will be the key to developing into God's nation and fulfilling the goal of what God, for the making a people that have an impact on other nations. Everyone should have a wonderful day.